I think the environment around unilateral APAs has changed significantly. That's as a result of the state aid decisions. It's making people a little bit nervous about the level of certainty that maybe some of those unilateral APAs provide. In addition to that, we've seen governments also having a preference for bilateral APAs. So for example, we've seen unilateral APA requests being pushed or forced into bilateral APAs. And even some governments have policies of really where there's a bilateral treaty forcing a bilateral APA as opposed to a unilateral. Another thing that's going to impact and is impacting the attractiveness or use of unilateral APAs is the types of structures that were being used in the past that for these types of unilateral APAs were commonly sought are not happening as often, or taxpayers are restructuring out of those structures. So the role of unilateral APAs in many cases is decreasing. So overall, I think when it comes to unilateral APAs, we'll see a reduction in the number of requests in the coming years.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to make a distinction to answer this question between unilateral and bilateral APAs. I mean, from a bilateral standpoint, I think we're seeing a bit more interest lately just as a result of increased uncertainty as a result of BEPS and how countries are going to administer the new rules, and just an increased interest in transfer pricing from the governments. So, I mean, from the government standpoint, I think we're seeing a bit more interest in promoting the APA programs as well. The OECD has put out information kind of with a positive spin on bilateral APAs. Commission working papers have really promoted kind of a two-sided approach, which more closely can reflect a market outcome.
Where we're seeing taxpayers running into problems currently is perhaps where they've jumped into the APA process without doing thorough analysis beforehand and thinking about what is the information they're going to present, how are they going to present it, and whether an APA is right for that transaction as it's currently structured.
Yeah, I think even when there isn't an APA in place, you still have some certainty with respect to MAP programs, so the mutual agreement procedure under the relevant treaty. And you can roll that forward in lots of cases into an APA, which is a way of avoiding kind of prolonged disputes in the future over the same issue, dealing with auditors that might not be transfer pricing specialists per se. I think it's just increased uncertainty that's driving a lot of the actions from tax departments globally. So, I mean, this is also pushing taxpayers into bilateral APAs. The need for certainty, the need for a stable, effective tax rate moving forward without a lot of volatility to it. So many companies are in search of that, and locking down bilateral APAs is a way of playing into that strategy. It also eliminates the need for provisions on certain issues. I mean, if you have an agreement with both governments on each side of the transaction, you really shouldn't have to set a provision or reserve on that issue. So, I mean, the other issue I think that's driving this is reputational risk as we see it is, I think, highest we've ever seen it. Nobody wants to be splashed across the headlines, and having transparent bilateral APAs is a way of kind of, avoiding that from happening, let's say.